This channel is now about playing video games. A strange concept, I'm sure, if you've been watching me over the last couple years. But I thought, let's go through the games and talk about what I think are some of the best games for the best system. Starting off with Mortal Kombat. Like many of my peers, recently I've been getting back into Mortal Kombat. And of course, I would go with the two games for the Super Nintendo that I remember most. Now, when I was a kid, I had Mortal Kombat 2 on the Game Boy of all systems, but I figure why not also get the American version here for the Super Nintendo. I'm gonna say I'm kind of disappointed by it because it does kind of miss some characters for the first one. I think they get rid of Sonya for some reason, who I actually think is very fun to play as. But what I think supersedes 2, which is a good game, what is better perhaps even than 2 is Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate, or Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. I don't know where the Ultimate goes, but this is truly, to me, the ultimate Mortal Kombat game. I think it has the definitive costumes for most of the characters. I think it's got a great single-player setup. This is so much fun to play. I rented this a ton as a kid. Moving along, we have Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for the Super Nintendo. It's really interesting to go back to games that you played as a kid and kind of realize how either one, how easy they were, or two, just how much you've grown as a video game player. Because with a lot of these games, with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers specifically, I had a heck of a time clearing a lot of these games when I was a kid. It would take me weeks to actually be able to process and figure out how to play these games. Now I beat Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in an hour and a half. It's not that very long of a game. It's a beautiful looking side-scrolling beat 'em up where you get to, pick your favorite Power Ranger and you get to go through a town. I talked about Shaq as a media property in a previous video, or it might be a future video depending on when I can actually get that thing out. But Shaq Fu for the Super Nintendo is such a strange game. First of all, making a fighting game that centers around a guy who plays sports. Why did they decide that was a good idea? But they also put Shaq in a bunch of movies. And actually, I think that, is it Kazam or Shazam? I forgot what the Genie Shaq movie is called. It's either Shazam or Kazam. I'm gonna have to look this up later and edit in a little title below. But they made a fighting game with Shaq, and it's actually got some really cool looking characters in it. And the animation, I think, looks great. I love the sound effects as well. Let's talk about these all at once. It is the Super Star Wars trilogy that came out for the Super Nintendo. We've got Super Star Wars, Super Empire Strikes Back, and Super Return of the Jedi. All of these are hard. I don't even, I was just talking about how I've grown as a video game player over the last, so many years. These games I will never beat. They're too hard. Super Star Wars, while it looks beautiful, and it does have a life system, meaning that I'm never going to advance to the end of the game. That's not going to happen. Super Empire Strikes Back is basically just everything from Hoth onward is trying to kill you, and there's just so many animals trying to kill you. There's crystals in the floor that will come out and try and shred up your feet. That I could not deal with. In Return of the Jedi is, I think, slightly easier, and you also have different characters that you can choose from in all of the different levels. But still, overall, I really wish I could get to the Death Star. I would love to be able to fly a ship around the second Death Star and blow it up. And I know that is possible, especially with passwords, but I'm never going to get to that myself, so it's just not as satisfying as I think really any of these games could be. Now, I talked previously about how I think Donkey Kong Country's kind of gone through a sort of a modern revision of people not liking Donkey Kong Country all that much. I think these are even better than the first Donkey Kong Country game, and I loved that game. I think my favorite, aesthetically, is Donkey Kong Country 2. I really love the pirate theme. All of the levels are really fun, and especially when you get to the castle at the end. I really loved especially the very tall, towery levels that you have to jump through. But it's hard. Going back and playing it over again, it was a lot harder than I remember it being, even though I think I breezed through this in college. But the other game that I wanted to talk about, Donkey Kong Country 3, I think is the great mixture of very aesthetically good looking. I think they improve upon the graphics of the first Donkey Kong Country game. And I think it's not a pain in the ass to play. And it's got this weird, almost like quasi-open world-ish element to it where you like drive some boats around to get to the different levels. But I think actually Donkey Kong Country 3, ooh, it's tough. I want to say that 2 is my favorite of the Donkey Kong countries, but man, 3 is also very good. It wouldn't be a Super Nintendo collection video without a Super Scope game. And one of my favorite Super Scope games, part of one of my favorite Nintendo franchises, and I will say what I've said previously, probably the best on average Nintendo franchise, it is Mortal Kombat, the sequel to Battle Clash that came out a year or two previously. This was a Nintendo-produced game that only came out in North America. This was so much fun. The Gundam action of just shooting an enemy, and you've got all the different sub-weapons that you can choose from. The music's great. They add in even more enemies than in the first game. This is the complete package. If you have a Super Scope, I cannot recommend highly enough Mortal Kombat. And the fact is that this thing is like $5. It's not an expensive game. You owe it to yourself to play one of Nintendo's best games. A game I would not recommend is James Bond Jr. for the Super Nintendo. James Bond Jr. is a weird property that came out like after Timothy Dalton's run with James Bond finished. There was like that weird protracted time in the early 1990s where they were trying to figure out what to do with the franchise, and they ended up going with Pierce Brosnan for GoldenEye. But in that like 6 or 7 year period, they had to come out with something. So they came out with a cartoon. I've not seen the cartoon. I don't know how good it is. I think this is popular in Europe. But James Bond Jr. the game is like this combo, like vehicle shooting and action platformer that just, I don't know, it just doesn't pop for me. The shooting segments were really annoying because like if one pixel of your machine touches the ground, you're dead. I just overall did not really enjoy James Bond Jr. My only complete in-box Super Nintendo game is a gift from a super friend of the channel, Sean. And I'm so happy to have this. It is Star Trek: The Next Generation, Futures Past. This is such an interesting game that it seems like it almost like predicted or preceded No Man's Sky. It's a game where you are in complete command of the Enterprise. You've got access to the communication systems, navigation. You like have access to computer databanks, and boy, does that have a lot of text in it. You can go to the briefing room to consult with your senior officers. You talk with Romulans, Vulcans. You've got an admiral that calls you every once in a while. I haven't seen any game, even modern games, haven't pulled off what Futures Past does. The last game that I want to talk about, I think, is the most important out of my entire Super Nintendo collection. That is Super Mario RPG and the Legend of the Seven Stars. What makes this game special to me is that not only do I believe that this is the greatest RPG of all time, it is also the first ever retro game that I purchased. I have fond childhood memories of this because I borrowed it from a friend. I was entrapped by Mario being in an RPG setting. And I finished it and my life was changed, but I never actually bought it when I was a kid. When I was in high school, around sophomore or junior year, there was a retro store near me and I went there and I picked this baby up. I picked it up because around the same time I was getting back into the Super Nintendo. I was emulating, I was playing things like Chrono Trigger, Majora's Mask. I think I might have even emulated this very game. But then when I went to that retro store and I found it, and I said, I still have my Super Nintendo. This thing, it's $20, and $20 back in the mid-2000s was a lot for this game. I probably overpaid for this, even though now it's like $80. But still, this might be the most precious game that I have in my collection of all of the games that I own, because this game got me into retro game collecting and is the big reason why I have all of these games and why I am able to remember so much of my childhood, because I can connect it with a physical item. I hope you've seen something that you've liked. I don't know if I have unlocked any memories in your head. But for now, I've been your man out of Japan, Jay Contra. Thanks for watching. See you next time, and mahalo.